A teenager's body found dumped in the woods.
He sees a Rubbermaid bin. He lifts the lid and actually realizes that he is looking at a dead body. Cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation. He was thrown out like trash.
When I got that phone call, I was enraged.
His family explains he was supposed to be on a college admissions trip.
He was applying to university for art.
He was an artistic, intelligent, and beautiful soul.
But the investigation reveals it was all a lie.
I emailed the art school, but nobody emailed me back.
She had created and fabricated this entire story.
And when a surprising eyewitness steps forward, she points detectives to members of the victim's own family.
She took the time to learn what made him happy, and she used that as a way to kill him.
You're saying I murdered somebody. That's correct.
This is one of the saddest and most disturbing cases that I've ever worked.
She's just pure evil.
April 2nd, 2017. In Richmond, Virginia, a man is taking a break from work when he comes across a strange object.
As he's taking his smoke break and walking through the woods, he sees a Rubbermaid bin. And as he gets closer, he sees what he believes to be a shoe sticking out of the bin.
Curiosity, of course, strikes him, and he goes over.
He lifts the lid and actually realizes that he is looking at a dead body.
Henrico 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Yes, I found a dead body over in the woods. I just reported it. I don't know what to do.
Okay. I've got the police car. Were they still breathing at all?
No, they're in a tote, like in a tote.
They start taking photographs. What we see when we open the lid of the box is a young black male that the only way I can describe it is kind of like put in like an accordion. Knees tucked to the chest.
Detectives notice powder covering the body.
It was determined that it was lime, which will stop decay of human flesh. Detectives had a theory that lime was put in the box with the body so that whenever this individual was found, if ever, it would be very hard to determine the timing of the death and maybe how they died. Homicide detectives lay a white sheet down on the grass and roll the bin over so that they can remove the body. And it's at that point when they discover that actually behind the back of the individual, the wrists have been bound with a purple athletic type tape.
No cutting of the skin, no bruising of the body, nothing that would suggest there had been any trauma inflicted on this individual.
When they search the police database for missing persons, investigators find a possible match.
It was determined that there was a missing persons report for an individual that had been filed several weeks earlier by the Sisters of Martre Coles. They pulled up his DMV photograph in the system, and they were able to determine that those two photographs were a match and that we were dealing with the body of Martre Coles. This is a 19-year-old boy that no one has seen or heard from in weeks. No one was notified, including his family. And that was a strategic decision that was made by law enforcement because they felt like they were able to have the upper hand and potentially gain more information if everybody still thought Martre was just a missing person. There were a lot of questions that detectives had about who could have done this, when this death occurred, and why this would have happened.
Martre Coles was born on October 22, 1997, the youngest of 8 children raised by Maurice and Karina Coles.
As a kid, Martre was more of a loner due to him being the youngest. He was always under our mother. She would take him everywhere.
Martre was funny, sensitive, and he was very smart.
From an early age, he exhibited a passion for art.
My mom's father actually introduced Martre into drawing. I feel like drawing brought Martre was his peace.
He wanted to go to school for video games, like drawing for video games and stuff.
Tragedy changed Martre's plans for the future when his mother suddenly died of a heart attack in 2014.
My mom's passing affected Martre in a major way. He wasn't himself anymore. He was lost without my mother being around.
I feel like he changed, like, internally. I saw some depression. He really didn't know how he could function and move on without my mom.
Martre's siblings, being in their 20s, had already moved out of the home, which left him with only his grieving father, Maurice, for support.
They both were destroyed. They both were dealing with their own personal feelings behind the death. So my dad couldn't tend to Martre mourning when he was mourning that he lost his wife.
One of Maurice's friends and co-workers, Denise Gay, saw what was happening and offered to help. She was a single mother raising 5 children of her own.
My mother is like the typical, like what most people end up seeing as the mother bear.
Denise was kind of Maurice's shoulder to cry on when his wife died.
Denise treated Martre like a son. And as she spent more time at the house, her friendship with Maurice blossomed into romance.
I was feeling like Maurice is going to end up being like the last relationship that she would have for a significant amount of time because they both seem like very happy.
Before long, Maurice invited Denise and her youngest daughter to move in with them.
Even though Martre's father was not married to Denise, they were living in somewhat of a step-family situation.
I didn't care to get to know her. I don't know what type of woman would move into a dead woman's home within a month. She didn't rub me the right way when I married. My father, he was a Rolling Stone that's been presented to me all of my life, so that wasn't really shocking.
Martre, he was still mourning his mother, but after a while, maybe like a couple months or so, he did start warming up to my mother because she was explaining to us like, I'm not here to replace your mother, but I am a person who is going to be here for you.
By 2017, Martre seemed to be recovering from his grief. He'd even started dating.
Martre had a unique relationship with his girlfriend. They had met in high school, and they actually communicated almost 24 hours a day.
He was also bonding with Denise's children.
We both did want to work in like the game industry, him on the art side, me on the more like coding programming side of it.
He was applying to Full Sail University for art.
Denise was assisting him, like reaching out to the counselor to get a tour. Martre was very excited about going to Full Sail, and that they contacted him and that they were in a different state. He was excited about possibly starting something new.
But Martre never got the chance to fulfill his dreams. Instead, he's become the victim of an unthinkable homicide. And Virginia police are beginning their investigation.
Martre Coles' body was taken to the office of the medical examiner for an autopsy.
The cause of death was determined to be asphyxiation.
There are 2 substances found in the bloodstream of this individual, that being trazodone and traces of GHB. GHB, of course, being the street name for what we call the date rape drug. Trazodone is used often for people who are having trouble sleeping.
Potentially what happened was this person was drugged, passed out, and maybe even put in the box in that particular accordion position while still alive and suffocated inside of the box.
The just callousness of the actions. Why did a 19-year-old have to die like this?
Coming up, investigators find a potential eyewitness.
You all right? All good? You got in trouble, right?
As she's in her room watching TV, she hears a scream coming from the room next door.
When detectives study Martre's missing persons report, they learn it was filed 20 days earlier on March 13th by his sisters, Michelle and Marquisha Coles. Using the information provided by the sisters in their report, homicide investigators are able to start piecing together the events of the day Martre vanished.
The last time I saw Martre, we had a birthday get-together for my sister. And I took him back home so he could get ready to go and visit the school.
He was going to be going on a trip out of town to Full Sail University in Florida, where he was hoping to be admitted as an art student.
According to the report, Martre needed to put the finishing touches on an art project for his application before leaving for Florida.
He was to take it to school with him, and it was a mask of his face.
The sisters wished him luck and went home to rest.
I went to sleep. I woke up to about 80 missed calls.
She had numerous calls missed from Martre's girlfriend. She is very concerned that something has happened to him.
Martre was not responding to her messages.
Michelle reached out to her sister, Marquisha, and they head over there to the residence.
When the sisters returned to the house just a few hours after dropping off their brother, Denise told them Martre had already left. She told them while packing, Martre realized he left his wallet at Michelle's house.
The last time she saw him, he was walking out of the house saying he was going to walk to Michelle's to get his wallet.
But Martre never showed up.
We kind of rode around the neighborhood just to see if we saw him walking up the street, and there was no sign of him. We went to and filed a police report the next morning.
They document the report and put it into the system, but unfortunately, because he is legally an adult at the time, they're not going to put out a notice for people to look for him.
Before they can interview Martre's sisters, investigators make an alarming connection.
Another member of the police department came to them and said, "Hey, this is triggering a memory of a report from not even a week ago.
2 weeks after Martre had gone missing, a security alarm had gone off at the Coles house.
2 Henrico police officers had responded, and when they got there late at night, the 2 people that were at the home were LaToya Gay, which is Denise's oldest daughter, and then her younger sister, Denise's youngest daughter.
When the officers asked LaToya what happened, she said it was her younger sister acting out.
The 12-year-old gets mad at her older sister, and she actually activates an alarm, and law enforcement responds. Henrico police have body-worn cameras, so we're able to watch this interaction of what unfolds.
You all right? All good? You got in trouble, right?
You know, explain to her that everything she does has a consequence.
Yeah, I think we've had that talk before.
So police had been out to this house before.
The youngest daughter has been getting in trouble lately. Was the reason why the one police officer had that familiarity with the young lady.
They determined that there was really nothing wrong other than 2 sisters that were having a dispute.
Before the officers left, the youngest daughter asked to speak with the officer she recognized. Once they were in private, she told him a disturbing story.
What'd she say? Tell me this one.
The 12-year-old says it happened on the morning of March 12th. As she's in her room watching TV, she hears a scream coming from the room next door. So she got up, she goes into the hallway, gets to the door of Martre's bedroom, and looks in.
She had seen her mother and her sister pin him to the ground, one at his feet and one on his chest.
She describes something that looked kind of white on his face, but then catches eyes with her mother, who gives her the hand gesture to move on and go away. She went back to her room, and the next thing she recalls is hearing a noise, and she peeks open from her bedroom door to see her sister pushing a plastic bin down the hallway.
Are you being truthful, or are you making this up because you're mad?
At the time, officers didn't know what to make of the story, so they called her mother, Denise.
She's accusing LaToya, a sister she had just gotten in a fight with, so it sounds like trying to get back at her sister. Denise pretty much confirms she thinks that's what it is.
Make up a lot of stuff trying to get out of trouble, but you can't get out of trouble.
At the time, the officers chalked it up to an overactive imagination. They file a report, but don't investigate further. But now, detectives wonder if it was more than that.
She mentions Martre's body being put in a bin and taken away from the house. And when they realize how specific that description is and how closely it matches the way that Martre's body was found, they then become very concerned that it is possible this little girl was telling the truth. Immediately, LaToya and Denise are now suspects.
April 3rd, 2017. It's been 1 day since the body of 19-year-old Martre Coles was found dumped in the Virginia woods. Now armed with body cam footage of Denise Gay's daughter describing Martre's death, detectives proceed with caution. They ask Martre's older sisters to come in for an interview without informing them they've found his body.
The investigators know that something isn't quite right with Denise Gay. So there is a decision made that it was not going to be shared with the family at that time, that a body was found on April 2nd.
They ended up calling us down to the precinct for further questions on the relationship between Denise and Martre.
According to the sisters, Martre and Denise got along well enough in the beginning.
Martre told me that his relationship with Denise was pretty good, that she would talk to him, help him with like homework and things like that, help him with his art.
His bigger problems were really with Denise's daughter. She was a very troubled young girl. She would pick fights with people.
She had been, taking his stuff and destroying his things and, stuff like that.
Okay.
She was drawing stuff on the floors and trying to make it seem like as if Trey was drawing it. Just a lot of weird things started happening in the home.
Whenever Maurice would discover something had happened, Denise would say that the problems were Martre's fault to cover for her daughter.
The sisters reveal the issues between Martre and Denise's 12-year-old daughter only got worse.
They got into physical fights where they would push each other and yell and scream.
She was stabbing him and stuff.
She picked up some scissors and allegedly stabbed Martre in the head. Denise hid that from Maurice.
I asked Martre, have you told my mom? Have you told Maurice that all these things are happening? He's like, yeah, I did. And they say they're going to handle it. I'm just going to stay in my room and keep to myself.
According to his sisters, Martre began to suspect Denise was doing more than just hiding her daughter's behavior. She was encouraging it.
Martre expressed to me that he felt like Denise was like trying to create a wedge between him and my father.
I think Denise wanted Martre gone because that was something of my mother's left in the home, and she was very jealous of my mom.
And what was his relationship with your dad like?
Iffy. Like, he felt like my dad didn't like him. He felt like my dad didn't want him there.
Marquisha and Michelle say it was one of the reasons why Martre was looking forward to college.
He was excited about possibly starting something new, getting away from everything that was going on.
But in the weeks since his disappearance, they discovered something strange.
I emailed the art school, but nobody emailed me back.
His girlfriend knew that he had been communicating with Full Sail University, and they shared email information. She logged into his emails and looked through them.
She said that he was having a conversation with someone named Sheila Crenshaw.
Martre's girlfriend did some digging of her own and said, wait a second, this email is written pretty poorly, and then it's written and sent from a Gmail address. No legit university is going to have a Gmail address.
When the detectives reach out to Full Sail University, they find out that there is no one by the name of Sheila Crenshaw.
Someone had come up with Sheila's name and was trying to trick Martre into thinking that this woman was talking to him from the administration office at Full Sail University.
Coming up, a mysterious figure returns to the scene of the crime.
There are some still shot frames of an SUV and someone wearing a hoodie.
And investigators close in on their killers.
What happened?
You killed him in your house. The last time you saw him, he was in a storage bin.
Just 24 hours into the hunt for 19-year-old Martre Coles' killer, investigators have a possible eyewitness to his death, and now evidence that someone tricked him into going on a college tour.
Someone went through a lot of trouble in this ruse to get Martre to believe he had been accepted at Full Sail University.
A search warrant is obtained and is executed on April 3rd at the residence. At that time, nobody is actually in the house. We are going to want to see if we can find anything in the bedroom itself that might help identify what these two women were doing to Martre.
Detectives find nothing to support the idea that Martre left for his college visit.
Everything that he owned appeared to still be present in that room. His computer, his backpack.
But there is also nothing to support Denise's daughter's story about witnessing a crime.
During the search warrant, other things that were taken for evidence included laptops that belonged to Denise Gay and Martre's own laptop. Ultimately, they are turned over to the FBI for a full analysis of the data.
As the search continues, Denise's older daughter, Latoya, shows up at the house.
It's very apparent that she's uncomfortable and she's agitated, and she actually walks outside and sits down in her car and has a phone conversation that's fairly lengthy.
The next thing that is very interesting is that she actually leaves the residence before the search is completed.
Because of her demeanor, detectives ask other officers to actually follow her to see where she goes.
Officers follow Latoya to a familiar location.
Latoya led them right to where Martre's body was found. Investigators hadn't released any information to the family about the body. The only one that could possibly know where that body was located was the killer.
What we believe she was doing at that time was trying to see if there was any police activity that had the body been found.
Obviously, they immediately realized that the story provided by the youngest daughter is highly likely to be accurate. Another officer indicates that he actually has a motion-activated hunting camera, and they decide that it would be interesting to see if anybody else returns to that site.
And it was placed on a tree that would capture both the location of where the box was found as well as the bit of road.
5 days later, the camera captures grainy images of someone entering the dump site.
During the later part of April 7th, there are some still shot frames of what first looks like a SUV that is parked right there at the opening of the wooded area. Then we have another silhouette image that the best that can be described is someone who appears to be wearing a hoodie. There's no other defining aspects to this silhouette, nothing to suggest if it's a man or a woman.
Although detectives cannot identify the figure, they do notice something about the vehicle.
It was a dark SUV with flashy rims.
Martre's father, Maurice Coles, owns a large black SUV, and his vehicle actually had some pretty unique rims.
If we were making a conclusion that that was Maurice's car, we had to ask ourselves, Did Maurice Coles have something to do with the death of his son, Martre?
The list of potential conspirators in Martre Coles' murder has now grown to include his father, Maurice.
Maurice's black SUV was driven by himself and Denise. Nobody else had access to use that vehicle. The detectives decide that they need to verify the whereabouts of Denise and Maurice at the time that those photographs were taken.
Both Maurice and Denise work at a processing plant in Smithfield, Virginia, about an hour and a half southeast of Richmond. So police check their work schedules around the time the SUV was spotted at the dump site.
By using the cameras of the parking lot, but more importantly, the electronic time card, we were confident that Maurice Coles was in Smithfield during the evening hours of April 7th. That was not him in the image.
The evidence might rule out Maurice, but it further incriminates Denise. Records indicate she left work early on April 7th.
Denise is actually on security footage leaving the building and getting into the black SUV.
We were able to use the technology for the GPS location to track Denise's phone.
The cell phone data shows that Denise leaves Smithfield and comes back north, and it actually traces her going right past the location where Martre's body had been found.
Since only the killer could know the location of Martre's body, investigators can now tie Denise to the murder.
The evidence also confirmed that the 12-year-old girl is telling the truth. Her story was legit, and the implications of Denise and LaToya being involved were true.
On April 10th, Denise is brought in for questioning.
Okay, and I don't think that it's a surprise why you're here. Right?
You're saying I murdered somebody.
That's correct. You know why you're here.
No. What happened?
You killed him in your house. The last time you saw him, he was in a storage bin.
She just says, I don't know what you're talking about, and will not admit to anything.
Following the interview, detectives place Denise under arrest. Their next target is LaToya.
What we learned was that LaToya Gay had actually left the Commonwealth, and we find her in South Carolina with some family members.
You can't run away from it anymore, okay? There's a murder warrant for you.
For me? Why is it for me?
And it almost comes across as she's not surprised that they're arresting someone for murder, but she's surprised that they're arresting her for murder.
The initial idea was that we would maybe see if LaToya would cooperate and testify against her mother, but it was very clear that she was not going to be cooperating.
Now that police have their suspects in custody, they're able to notify Martre's sisters of his death.
I was enraged. When I got that phone call, everything just was checked off of how I felt about Denise from the beginning. I knew she was pure evil when I met her.
It was very difficult for them to know that we had known for many days before they did that their brother was dead. But they ultimately understood the decision. Once we've arrested LaToya and Denise, we still don't really understand why this crime has occurred. We keep doing further investigation and did criminal background checks on both of them.
That check reveals Denise has an extensive criminal record.
And what was interesting is that a lot of her criminal history related to fraudulent behavior and lies and deceit.
The FBI's analysis of Denise's laptop reveals her latest fraud.
Investigators found the email account of Sheila Crenshaw on Denise's computer.
Denise Gay was in fact this Sheila Crenshaw.
She had created and fabricated this entire Full Sail University story so that she could explain why later he would be absent and no one could find him.
We are also learning about some of the searches that were done on Denise's computer regarding Lyme, GHB, suffocation, and why would someone be asking for those types of questions if they didn't play a role in some particular actions.
Despite these discoveries, the case against Denise remains largely circumstantial. With a 12-year-old as their only eyewitness, prosecutors hope it will be enough to secure a conviction.
What was the motive for why these two grown women would harm this young man in the way that they did?
On December 8th, 2017, Denise and LaToya Gay stand trial for the murder of Martre Coles.
Our best theory of a motive relates to Denise's relationship with Maurice. Maurice lost his wife, who he dearly loved.
Denise looked at Martre as being the last thing that was reminding Maurice of what he had had before.
Denise snapped because jealousy got the best of her.
Prosecutors say the evidence shows Denise plotted for weeks to kill Martre, and she manipulated LaToya into helping her.
Denise saw her children as accessories to her criminal behavior.
Denise's youngest daughter is the state's star witness.
We believe that she drugged him, and once he became somewhat woozy, LaToya comes into the room to assist her in holding him down. The evidence from the youngest daughter is that Denise is actually on his chest. We don't know if he suffocated from the weight or if they were just able to take control of him. He was thrown out like trash. He was put in a Rubbermaid bin and tossed in the woods.
The defense attempts to undermine the young girl's testimony.
The defense wanted the jury to believe that this troubled 12-year-old is actually the killer.
Not only was Denise Gay going to not accept any responsibility, but that worse, she would try to pin this case on her 12-year-old daughter.
When the jury delivers its verdict, it comes as a shock to everyone in the courtroom.
They convicted both Denise and LaToya with conspiracy, but they didn't actually convict them on first-degree murder. The jury was hung, which to this day I still don't understand.
Prosecutors immediately prepare for a retrial, and a new witness comes forward.
Within a couple of days, Maurice Coles calls detectives.
Seeing the actual evidence in front of him made him believe what he had never wanted to believe before, that a woman that he had brought into his home and he thought cared for him and his family had actually killed his son.
Maurice was cleaning the house out, and he had found Denise's purse in this closet. In the purse was her wallet and her cell phone. In the wallet, we found the actual receipt of the purchase of a shovel.
And once we had her physical phone, we had the actual text messages that she and LaToya had been exchanging.
Denise was communicating with her daughter, LaToya, that she could not find the body on April 7th. That gave us clear and convincing evidence that that was in fact Denise Gay in that image of the game camera.
The new evidence makes the outcome of the second trial less uncertain.
Ultimately, both women wound up being convicted of first-degree murder.
Denise Gay was given a life plus 10 years sentence. LaToya Gay is going to be serving a 30-year sentence.
I don't think that a mother with any type of compassion for her children would put her daughters in that type of predicament.
Denise is just pure evil.
This case is one of the saddest and most disturbing cases that I've ever worked. She took the time to get to know Martre and learn what made him happy, and she used that as a way to kill him.
I do still talk to both my mother and my sister on a regular basis. I do still believe they might not have done it, but Martre should be remembered as this really outgoing, kind person.
If Martre was alive today, I would see him living somewhere in California, being an artist.
I just want him to be remembered as artistic, intelligent, and beautiful soul.
The human animal is a strange and fragile creature, driven by impulses that defy reason, walking a fine line between civilization and the abyss of absolute depravity. In the summer of 1969, a young woman named Stephanie Casper walked out of a restaurant after a shift and simply vanished into humid Wisconsin night, leaving behind a trail of silence that would haunt investigators for more than half a century. What officers eventually found scattered in pieces across Racine County was not just a crime scene, but a masterclass in calculated cruelty, executed with a chilling level of patience and surgical precision that immediately told any seasoned detective we were dealing with a predator who possessed terrifying control. My. You have to wonder what kind of monster looks at a vibrant 18-year-old girl on the verge of her adult life and decides to reduce her to fragments wrapped in newspaper and brown paper bags along the muddy banks of the Root River. I tell you, some people walk among us wearing the mask of normalcy, hiding a darkness so profound that it defies human comprehension. When the local kids stumbled upon the gruesome remains near an old steel trestle bridge on 8 Mile Road, investigators arrived to find a scene that was as methodical as it was sickening. Her torso and left leg were entirely missing, swallowed by a landscape that refused to give up its secrets easily, while the cuts at her joints were clean and deliberate, showing none of the frantic panic usually associated with crimes of passion. Instead, this was the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who took their time to dismantle a human life and scatter the pieces across miles of rural backroads like discarded garbage. The pathologist found puncture wounds beneath her chin and a severe cut across the back of her neck, pointing to a severed artery as the probable cause of death. But without vital organs, it remained a dark puzzle. I tell you, human beings can be extraordinarily efficient when their intentions are rooted in pure evil. As the investigation unfolded, the usual parade of suspects and messy personal lives crawled out of the woodwork. offering up a chaotic tapestry of rumors, secret romances, and defensive lies. Stephanie had been keeping a secret from her parents, dating a 22-year-old serviceman named John, crossing racial lines in an era and a region where such things could trigger explosive hatred. Yet every thorough check cleared John of any involvement in her murder. Then there were the whispers surrounding her own father, Charles Casper, who gave investigators a chillingly inappropriate chuckle when asked if he killed his own daughter, remarking that if he had, they never would have found her. You have to be kidding me. What kind of father responds to the brutal slaughter of his child with a joke about concealment? Even if grief and cynicism sometimes manifest in bizarre ways, yet despite the dark cloud of suspicion, time cards and alibis eventually push the family drama aside, bringing the focus back to the anchor of Stephanie's daily routine, the Mark's Big Boy restaurant where she worked and where numerous men knew her schedule inside and out. Among them was Michael Bartelt, a young cook who had recently returned from Vietnam, a man who offered unsolicited details, claimed Stephanie left through the back door instead of the front, and hastily announced plans to flee to Hawaii or perhaps Las Vegas, while spinning a web of conflicting timelines that should have set off every alarm bell in the precinct. His own sister, Pam, would later come forward years later to point an accusing finger directly at Michael, detailing a horrifying history of abuse, family lies, and a desperate cover-up designed to distance him from the murder. Yet, back in 1969, the investigation lacked the modern technological marvels of DNA profiling, leaving detectives to chase shadows, evaluate unreliable witness statements, and watch helplessly as potential leads withered away in the bureaucratic fog. Decades bled into one another, while Stephanie's family carried an unbearable grief that rippled down through the generations. Touching relatives who never even had the chance to meet her, science eventually crept forward, turning degraded pubic hairs and environmental evidence over to laboratories that managed to extract partial male DNA profiles, though they initially failed to find an immediate match in national databases like Cody's. Suspects like Wilbert Mackey, a violent criminal whose own children whispered terrifying stories of his obsession with a self-styled Root River Killer moniker, were cycled through the grinder of investigation and ultimately ruled out through DNA comparisons. Even as Michael Bartelt died of sepsis before modern investigators could corner him with advanced forensics, his DNA ultimately did not match the hair samples recovered from the gruesome secondary disposal box found on a local farm years later. Lieutenant Brian Van Stock, a dedicated investigator, refusing to let the dust settle on a cold case, continues to pull at every frayed thread, operating on the current working theory that Stephanie likely crossed paths with a wandering stranger who lured her into a vehicle after she walked out of that restaurant in anger and frustration. The pursuit of truth in a murder investigation is a lonely, grinding war against time, fading memories and institutional barriers, but it is a war that must be fought because the dead cannot speak for themselves. I tell you, evil leaves tracks if you know where to look, and while the perpetrator of this vile act may have thought the passage of 50 years would grant him permanent immunity, secrets have a stubborn way of rotting in the dark until someone finally opens a door and lets the light rush in. Human beings are strange, fragile creatures. They will trade their very soul for a handful of silver, or in this case, for the hollow comfort of keeping up appearances. They kill for the most pathetic, unimaginative reasons you could ever conjure up. My. I tell you, you have to be kidding me. You look at a man like Nick Cordova, a husband, a father, a hard-working business owner who built his life from the ground up, and you think to yourself, who could possibly want to snuff out that light? And then you find the answer, and it turns your stomach, because it was hiding in plain sight, sitting right across the office desk. May the 27th, 2020, Gilbert, Arizona, a place where the desert heat is nothing compared to the cold malice hiding behind closed doors. Alicia Cordova calls 911. Her husband has been hurt at his business, Gilbert Air. She is on FaceTime with him, hearing the chaos, hearing the screams, helpless through a screen. When we arrive, the office is a crime scene. A back window, an empty box of Freon used to conceal a weapon, the appearance of stage robbery. But something was off. It was too messy, yet too convenient. A thief in a hurry does not leave behind cash in the pockets while staging a chaotic execution. It was a setup, and in my experience, when a scene is staged to look like a random act of violence, you are not looking for a stranger. You are looking at a partner, someone who shared the daily grind with the victim. Nick Cordova was a man of substance. He loved a challenge, raising his younger siblings, taking pride in his HVAC company, and trusting a business partner who turned out to be a shady character. Dave Sweetman. Money is a corrosive thing. It eats away at bonds that you think are unbreakable. Dave had taken thousands of dollars from the company account, leaving a trail of financial panic and corporate betrayal. And when you back a desperate person into a corner, they do not always choose a high road. They choose the darkness. The evidence showed that Nick was shot in the lobby, executed in cold blood, while his business partner was supposedly pinned down or distracted. Dave Sweetman had a history, a background full of warning signs, and a new life insurance policy that promised millions upon a partner's death. My, people are just the strangest creatures. A man killed for greed, for insurance payouts, for a twisted sense of control. I have spent my life looking into the eyes of people who have done the unthinkable. I tell you, it stays with you. The Cordova family lost a father, a husband, a cornerstone of their lives, all for money that brought nothing but ruin. It is a tragedy of the highest order, and it makes you realize that sometimes the ties that bind are the very things that end up being used to strangle you. Human beings are strange creatures. They kill each other for the most ridiculous reasons you could possibly imagine in this world. I am Lieutenant Joe Kenda, and in my career as a homicide investigator, I have seen far too many people who think they can outsmart the law just through their selfishness and cheap lies. People often say that time heals all wounds, but in the case of Laura Sweetman in Gilbert, Arizona, time has only made the stench of a botched investigation reek even more. My. You have to ask yourself what the people tasked with upholding the law were doing all those years when a human being died under suspicious circumstances, and they treated it like a joke. I am telling you this story not for entertainment, but to remind you that past mistakes will always come back to haunt those who stood by coldly indifferent to the pain of others. Look at Dave Sweetman. The victim is husband, a man who always plays the innocent, yet carries a mind full of secrets and relentless manipulation. They met back in their teenage years, a picture-perfect couple on paper. But behind the scenes during the 2000s, Laura was living in fear inside her own home. A brilliant pediatric neurology doctor with an exceptional mind in medicine, yet she was being mentally crushed by her own husband day by day. I tell you, you cannot understand the feeling when a woman has to live in such coldness and threats that she is forced to plan an escape in April of 2013 after discovering that her husband had an entire secret second family and a preschool-age son. It is disgraceful how Dave's deceit was exposed, and that was also when Laura took that dangerous step to walk towards freedom for herself. Look at the utter helplessness of the legal system back then. In April of 2013, Laura called the police to report that Dave had choked her and threatened to kill her inside their own home. There was an audio recording lasting over an hour, capturing Dave's voice threatening suicide and physically blocking Laura from leaving. Yet the court dismissed it due to insufficient evidence. You have to be kidding me. A woman crying for help in the middle of the night. A husband holding her car keys so she cannot flee. Yet judges and police officers shrugged it off for cheap excuses. Even after Laura obtained protective order and full custody of the children, she lived in constant fear of being followed. A neighbor named Harry spotted a suspicious car parked right in front of Laura's house and recorded its license plate number, a crucial detail that the Gilbert Police Department simply tossed into the trash and never bothered to investigate. That is pure administrative blindness and gross irresponsibility. Then the horrifying turning point happened in December of 2013. Laura was found dead in her bathtub while her children were staying with Dave. There was no sign of forced entry. The back door was unlocked, and a plastic baby gate was knocked out of place at the foot of the stairs. The police arrived, gave the scene a quick glance, and concluded that it was an undetermined death. They interviewed Dave, a man who broke down in tears immediately before police even told him what happened to his wife. What kind of sensitivity makes Dave cry before knowing the news? Or was it just crocodile tears from a man who already had a script ready in his head? And then we look at the other men Laura was dating during that time, especially Will, the personal trainer who was the last person known to be with Laura on that fateful night. Will deleted his text messages and provided DNA. But police never bothered to seriously check the time he left or verify his alibi. No one cared whether those men were jealous or had anything to do with her death, simply because the police department was too lazy to ask the right questions. The peak of this corruption lies directly inside the autopsy room and the records of people who treated human lives like a joke. Medical examiner Dr. Mark Shelley, the man who performed the autopsy on Laura, is the exact same individual who once took a dead Marine's brain home with him for his children to touch and take pictures of out of morbid curiosity. That man was only slapped with a small fine and later hired by Maricopa County because they were experiencing a severe staff shortage. What a horrifying joke. A man with a compromised professional record and bizarre behavioral issues was the one who put pen to paper to sign off on the cause of death for a talented doctor like Laura. Furthermore, the laboratory director Norman Wade was also someone previously convicted of stealing a firearm from an evidence room and selling it at a pawn shop. Yet he was still hired and lied on his employment application. When you have people like that running justice, what else can you expect other than a garbage conclusion ruling the cause of death as undetermined? Laura Sweetman lived a vibrant life, serving as a dedicated doctor for sick children and a devoted mother. But in the end, she had to depart amidst the silence of the law and the apathy of those responsible. Her loved ones and friends wore colorful clothing to her funeral, instead of black, to honor her passionate spirit for life. But true justice has never been fully served for Laura throughout all these years. I sit here, staring blankly into empty space, and I ask myself just when those in power will stop treating human life as a joke to cover up their own incompetence and corruption. If you have a conscience, never forget the name Laura Sweetman, and make those responsible speak up before it is too late. Who was requesting a welfare check on his elderly in-laws. His voice trembled with anxiety as he tried to explain the situation to the operator. He explained that his family had gathered outside the apartment complex where Long and Hong lived. They had knocked on the door, but there was no response. His teenage son had tried to peer through the windows and noticed that one of them was slightly open, and things inside appeared to be in disarray. Too terrified to enter the residence themselves, the family waited outside, praying that everything would be all right. Officer Weller, a dedicated officer with 14 years of service on the force, was the first to arrive on the scene. He was accustomed to the usual routine of welfare checks. But as he pulled up to the apartment complex, he immediately sensed that something was different. It was unusually early in the morning for such a request, and seeing an entire family gathered outside in the driveway, visibly shaken and pale with worry, made his instincts kick in. With his flashlight in hand, Officer Weller entered the quiet apartment. The silence inside was heavy, almost suffocating. As he moved through the rooms, he noticed the classic signs of a break-in. The living room was in complete disarray. Compact discs were scattered across the floor, and furniture was overturned as if someone had been desperately searching for valuables. He called out, his voice echoing off the walls, but there was no answer. He checked the kitchen, the bathroom, and then walked into the bedroom. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty. Officer Weller turned around, preparing to leave the room and report back to the family, thinking perhaps the elderly couple had simply gone out for an early morning walk. But just as he turned toward the door, his flashlight beam caught something unusual. Next to a very small closet door, there were distinct dark hand smudges on the wall. A sudden, chilling sensation washed over him. Every instinct honed over his 14 years of duty told him to proceed with caution. He hesitated for a brief moment, breathing in the quiet air, before reaching out and opening the closet door. Inside, the devastating reality of a terrible crime was revealed. Long Nguyen and Hong Lee were found bound with heavy duct tape, hidden away in the dark space. There was no breath left in them, and the sheer brutality of the scene left the seasoned officer in a state of absolute shock. Officer, Weller walked out of the bedroom into the middle of the living room, unable to speak or even use his radio for several long seconds. When he finally found his voice, he contacted his dispatchers to request a supervisor in the homicide unit. The investigation was quickly handed over to Detective Stuart, a veteran homicide investigator with 21 years of experience. Even for someone who had spent over 2 decades dealing with the darkest aspects of human nature, this crime scene was particularly harrowing. It was clear that a violent struggle had taken place, starting right at the front door. There were signs of blunt force trauma on the victims, and the sheer volume of duct tape used to bind them suggested a cold, calculated cruelty. Yet, as the crime scene investigators began to meticulously process the apartment, they discovered a series of clues that seemed almost too convenient. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills, alongside a half-burned marijuana cigarette. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana carefully wrapped around a beer bottle, left in plain sight. In Arlington, certain local gangs were known to use blue bandanas as their signature color, often leaving them behind as a way to claim responsibility or extort local business owners. To an outsider, it looked like a clear-cut case of a robbery committed by local gang members. But Detective Stuart and his team were skeptical. The crime scene felt staged, as if someone had deliberately placed these items to point the police in the wrong direction. The detectives began their work by interviewing the family members, seeking to understand who would want to harm such a gentle, hard-working couple. The only family member composed enough to speak with the investigators was Chow Tran, the son-in-law. Chow explained that the family had gathered the night before to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. The couple had a wonderful time and stayed until 10:30 in the evening, when another relative drove them home. That was the last time anyone had seen them alive. Chow also shared details about the family business. When Long and Hong first arrived in Texas, they had started a commercial sewing business, enlisting Chow to help manage it because of his strong English skills. For a time, they had achieved remarkable success, even securing prestigious contracts with major commercial brands like Disney. However, by the year 2011, their good fortune had begun to fade. They lost their primary contracts, and the business began to decline rapidly, leaving the family in deep financial distress. To cope with this heavy burden, the deeply traditional couple turned to spiritual beliefs from their homeland. They believed that their string of bad luck was a result of a spiritual curse, and they began searching for someone who could perform rituals to lift the heavy cloud hanging over their lives through a local Vietnamese newspaper. Chow and his mother-in-law discovered an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. This advisor, a woman named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed the power to remove negative energy, lift curses, and restore prosperity. Desperate to save their business and protect their family, Hong Lee and Chow contacted Daphne and traveled to her home for a consultation. Over the course of the following year, they placed their ultimate trust in her, hoping that her rituals would turn their fortunes around. Instead of finding peace, however, they found themselves trapped in an even deeper hole. As the investigation continued, the detectives attended the autopsy at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office. The medical examiner confirmed that while the victims had suffered physical trauma, the actual cause of death was suffocation due to layers of duct tape wrapped tightly around their faces. It was a heartbreaking revelation that only strengthened the detectives' resolve to bring the perpetrators to justice. A breakthrough in the case came from an unexpected source. Detective Stuart received a call from an insurance company, informing him that the elderly couple held a substantial life insurance policy worth at least $1 million, with Chow Tran named as one of the primary beneficiaries. While Chow had a solid alibi for the night of the murders, cooperating fully with the police and providing DNA and fingerprint samples, the detectives kept all possibilities open. They tested the DNA from the marijuana cigarette found at the scene, but it did not match anyone in the national database at the time. With no immediate matches and no new leads, the case unfortunately went cold for over 2 years. Then, in October of the year 2015, a sudden spark brought the investigation back to life. The National DNA Database flagged a match for the DNA found on the marijuana cigarette from the crime scene. The match belonged to Willie Guillory, who had recently been convicted of a felony involving the theft of a horse in Houston. Back in the year 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old with no prior criminal record, which was why his DNA had not been in the system when the murders first occurred. Detectives wasted no time in bringing the young man in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence linking him directly to the apartment in Arlington, Willie broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, a 52-year-old man who was struggling financially at the time. Even more shocking was Willie's revelation that they had been hired to commit the crime by none other than Daphne Wright, the spiritual advisor from Houston. According to Willie, Daphne had orchestrated the entire plan because the family owed her an astronomical amount of money for her services, somewhere between $250,000 and $280,000. When the family was unable to pay, Daphne decided to collect the money by targeting their life insurance policies. On December 16, 2015, police arrested Bobby Guillory. Facing the weight of the evidence, Bobby also confessed, confirming his nephew's story. He admitted that Daphne had promised him $10,000 to carry out the deed. Taking advantage of his financial desperation, Bobby further revealed that Daphne had provided him with the key to the apartment, which he had allegedly obtained from Chow Tran himself. Armed with this critical information, detectives arrested Daphne right at her home in Houston. During a search of her residence, investigators discovered detailed financial ledgers showing that she regularly charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for her spiritual services. In August of the year 2019, Daphne Wright was brought to trial. The courtroom was filled with tension as Chow Tran, who had been granted immunity in exchange for his testimony, took the stand. Chow described how Daphne had used her spiritual influence to control and manipulate his family, creating a sense of fear that ultimately led to the tragic events. The defense argued that Chow was far more complicit than he claimed, pointing out that he had ultimately received a substantial financial payout from the insurance policies. After hearing all the evidence, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would never again be able to exploit or harm others. Bobby and Willie Guillory were also held accountable for their roles in the crime. Though some questions regarding the full extent of everyone's involvement remained, the dedication of the Arlington Police Department ensured that the truth was brought to light. The memory of Long Nguyen and Hong Lee lived on through their children and the community that loved them, serving as a reminder of the enduring power of justice, the strength of family bonds, and the ultimate triumph of truth over darkness. The American dream is a fragile tapestry woven with threads of hope, ambition, and the relentless pursuit of a better life. For Long Nguyen and Hong Lee, this dream began with a journey across the ocean, leaving behind the familiar landscapes of Vietnam to build a future for their children in the sprawling, culturally diverse city of Arlington, Texas. By the turn of the millennium, the couple had established themselves as pillars of their community, embodying the resilience and industry of those who seek to turn a vision into reality. They were not merely immigrants. They were architects of a family legacy, working tirelessly in the commercial sewing industry, eventually securing contracts that promised stability and prosperity. Yet, life has a way of introducing unforeseen variables into even the most carefully constructed plans. By the year 2011, the winds of fortune had shifted. The lucrative contracts that had sustained their livelihood began to vanish, and the business, once a beacon of success, started to drift into the precarious waters of financial instability. In moments of profound distress, human beings often reach for anchors that transcend the material world. Long and Hong, deeply rooted in their traditional beliefs, sought solace and guidance in the ancient mysticism of their homeland. They believed that their misfortune was not merely a matter of economic fluctuations, but perhaps the result of unseen forces, curses that required spiritual intervention to be lifted. In their search for restoration, they were led to a woman named Daphne Wright, a spiritual advisor operating out of Houston. To the desperate, the promise of Savior often appears as a guiding light, and Daphne positioned herself as a conduit for fortune, claiming the power to remove malevolent curses and restore prosperity. Entrusted with their faith and their dwindling finances, the couple began a cycle of payments that would ultimately prove to be their undoing. What began as a search for blessing descended into a dark, coercive relationship as their debt to Daphne ballooned into hundreds of thousands of dollars. The spiritual advisor revealed a much colder, more transactional nature than the couple had ever anticipated. The atmosphere of the Nguyen household, once defined by the warmth of family gatherings and the quiet pride of hard work, became thick with an unspoken, suffocating tension. Behind closed doors, the pressure to satisfy Daphne's insatiable demands grew unbearable. Her influence over the family was not based on divine benevolence, but on the exploitation of fear and the psychological chains she had forged through their shared desperation. When the payments failed to manifest, the tone of her communications shifted from mystical guidance to lethal ultimatums. She made it clear that her financial interests were absolute, and the cost of non-payment would be nothing short of life itself. The fateful day arrived on June the 10th, 2012. The quiet morning in Arlington was shattered by a welfare check request that would reveal a scene of unimaginable horror. Chow Tran, the son-in-law of the victims, had reached out to emergency dispatchers, his voice heavy with foreboding that permeated the family. Upon the arrival of law enforcement, the residents presented a tableau of chaos that defied the peaceful reputation of the inhabitants. Investigators were confronted with a scene that appeared, at first glance, to be a burglary that had escalated into tragedy. However, the sheer brutality of the act, the hog-tied victims, the extensive use of duct tape, and the calculated violence pointed toward a motive far more sinister than simple theft. As detectives delved deeper into the wreckage of the lives left behind, they navigated a labyrinth of deception. The crime scene was cluttered with items intended to mislead: a blue bandana, a beer bottle, and traces of narcotics, all carefully arranged to cast suspicion upon local gang activity. Yet, for the seasoned investigators, these clues felt too orchestrated, a performance designed to obscure a much colder, more deliberate truth. The investigation soon shifted from the streets to the heart of the family, as the presence of a substantial life insurance policy cast a long, cynical shadow over the grieving relatives. The path to uncovering the truth was long and fraught with silence. For 3 years, the case remained in the cold, unyielding grip of uncertainty, a haunting reminder of lives cut short. It was only through the intervention of chance, a separate felony arrest of a young man named Willie Guillory, that the facade began to crumble. When DNA evidence retrieved from the crime scene finally linked back to Willie, the walls of the conspirators' silence began to collapse. Willie, who had been a mere teenager at the time of the crime, described a terrifying sequence of events dictated by his uncle, Bobby Guillory, and ultimately orchestrated by the woman they feared above all others, Daphne Wright. The narrative that emerged was one of a calculated, cold-blooded murder-for-hire scheme. Daphne had not only leveraged the couple's spiritual beliefs against them, but had also infiltrated their circle, manipulating their fear to ensure the successful execution of her lethal demands. Bobby Guillory, desperate and hungry, had been transformed into an instrument of her greed, fueled by the promise of financial reward. The revelation that the keys to the home had been provided, the scene staged to divert blame, and the cold logic used to justify the loss of human life, left investigators and the community reeling. The subsequent trials unfolded as a stark examination of the power dynamics between the predator and the prey. Daphne Wright, the self-proclaimed spiritual savior, was unmasked as a heartless architect of destruction, despite the legal complexities and the labyrinthine testimony of those involved. The weight of the evidence proved insurmountable. The jury's conviction of Daphne stood as a testament to the pursuit of justice, ensuring that she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars, removed from the society she had so ruthlessly exploited. For those who investigated the case, the outcome left a lingering, bittersweet resonance. While a measure of accountability had been achieved, the moral ambiguity surrounding the involvement of other family members continued to haunt the edges of the narrative. The tragedy of Long and Hong served as a profound reminder of the vulnerability of the human spirit, when confronted by the intersection of blind faith and calculated malice. Their American dream, once vibrant and full of promise, had been silenced by the greed of a few, leaving behind a legacy that now serves as a cautionary tale for all who value the sanctity of life, and the dangers of placing absolute trust in the hands of those who offer miracles at a price. As the case closed, the truth remained. The shadows of the past can be long, but eventually, even the deepest darkness must yield to the light of discovery. The summer heat in Texas has a way of pressing down on a city like a heavy, humid hand. In the early morning hours of June 10th, 2012, the city of Arlington was already beginning to simmer under a pale blue sky. On most days, this part of the state woke up to the quiet hum of air conditioners and the distant murmur of highway traffic. But on this particular Sunday, the silence in one suburban neighborhood was about to be shattered by a revelation so grim that it would linger in the minds of veteran investigators for decades to come. Officer Weller had seen his fair share of troubled mornings during his 14 years on the force. He was a man who believed in the simple, quiet order of community life. When the dispatch call came through at 7:29 in the morning, it seemed like a routine matter, the kind of call that usually ended with a polite conversation and a sigh of relief. A welfare check had been requested by a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant named Chow Tran. Chow had called the emergency line, his voice trembling with a mixture of anxiety and confusion, asking officers to check on his elderly in-laws, Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. When Officer Weller arrived at the apartment complex, the scene immediately struck him as unusual. Typically, a welfare check involved a single concerned relative or neighbor who had not seen someone for a few days. Here, an entire family had gathered on the manicured grass outside the apartment. They stood together in a tight, anxious cluster, their faces etched with deep concern. Chow Tran stood near the front, gesturing toward the building. He explained that his teenage son had gone up to knock on the door, but there had been no answer. The family had then noticed that one of the windows to the residence was slightly open. Something felt entirely wrong. The air was thick with an unspoken dread, a collective intuition that whispered of danger. Too terrified to step inside the home themselves, they waited on the pavement, looking to the uniform of the law for protection and answers. Officer Weller walked up the stairs, his boots echoing against the concrete. He called out as he pushed the door open, his voice steady but cautious. There was no response. The apartment was bathed in the dim light of early morning, and at first glance, it appeared as though a hurricane had swept through the small living space. The responding officers noted that the home was in a state of complete disarray. The silent closet. As Officer Weller moved deeper into the apartment, his senses were on high alert. The living room was a chaotic mess of overturned items and scattered belongings. He checked the kitchen, then the bathroom. Nothing. The only room left to inspect was the master bedroom. When he first crossed the threshold of the bedroom, his eyes did not immediately register the horror that lay in wait. His primary focus was simply finding the elderly couple, hoping against hope that they had merely stepped out for an early morning walk or were staying with another relative. He turned to leave the room, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Then he stopped. On the wall next to a very small closet, his flashlight caught the distinct shape of hand smudges. It was a subtle detail, but to an experienced officer, it was a silent cry for help left behind on the drywall. Weller hesitated. Every instinct in his body, that quiet inner voice that warns of incoming trauma, told him to proceed with caution, but duty demanded that he open the door. With a slow, careful movement, he pulled the closet door open. Inside the cramped space lay the bodies of Long Nguyen and Hong Lu. They had been hog-tied with thick silver duct tape. Their heads and mouths were wrapped completely in layers of the adhesive material. The narrow space of the closet was stained with a terrible amount of blood. In that split second, Weller knew there was no aid to be rendered. They were gone. For a moment, the veteran officer stood frozen in the center of the apartment. The sheer brutality of the scene was overwhelming. He walked out of the bedroom, past the scattered belongings in the living room, and stepped into the hallway. For several seconds, he was unable to speak, unable to even pick up his radio to call for backup. When he finally found his voice, he requested a supervisor and the homicide unit. The investigation begins. The Arlington homicide detectives arrive quickly, led by Detective Stuart, a seasoned investigator with 21 years of experience in solving the city's darkest mysteries. Even for a man who had spent more than 2 decades peering into the abyss of human cruelty, this scene was particularly devastating. The physical evidence suggested a struggle of immense violence. There were signs that the elderly couple had fought desperately for their lives, grabbing at the walls as they were forced toward the back of the apartment. Furniture in the living room was overturned, and compact discs were scattered across the carpet, giving the initial impression of a robbery gone wrong. ++ crime scene evidence. ++ overturned living room furniture. Scattered compact discs across the carpet. Hand smudges on the closet wall. Plate of crushed prescription pills on the coffee table. A discarded marijuana cigarette. A blue bandana wrapped around a beer bottle. ++. But as Detective Stuart examined the details, a sense of skepticism began to take root. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills, arranged as if someone had intended to snort them. Nearby, a discarded marijuana cigarette rested in an ashtray. Most striking of all was a light blue bandana carefully wrapped around a beer bottle, left in plain sight. In Arlington, gang activity was a known reality, and certain local gangs were notorious for extorting money from businesses and residents. The light blue bandana was a recognized color symbol. To an outsider, it looked like a clear calling card, a statement of responsibility left by young criminals. But to Detective Stuart, it felt too deliberate. The crime was exceedingly violent, far beyond what was typical for a standard burglary or a gang initiation. Most gang members seeking quick cash did not spend the time or effort required to bind victims in such a meticulous, torturous manner. The scene began to look less like a random act of street violence and more like a carefully constructed stage play designed to mislead the police. The legacy of the American dream. To understand why anyone would want to harm Long Nguyen and Hong Lu, the detectives had to look back at the history of the family. The elderly couple had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000. Like many before them, they left behind the familiar landscapes of their homeland to build a legacy for their 3 children and grandchildren in Texas. Arlington was home to a vibrant, industrious Vietnamese community that had grown steadily since the late 1970s Following the fall of Saigon, many families had successfully adapted to American society while holding tightly to their cultural heritage. Long and Hong were no exception. They were widely known as a sweet, generous, and hard-working couple who kept to themselves and never caused trouble for anyone. Upon arriving in Texas, they established a commercial sewing business. Because their son-in-law, Chow Tran, spoke the best English in the family, he became the public face of the enterprise, handling contracts, talking with suppliers, and managing the day-to-day business relations. For nearly a decade, their hard work paid off. They managed to secure lucrative manufacturing contracts, including work for prominent national entertainment brands. They were living the American dream. But by 2011, the tide of fortune had turned. The business lost its major contracts, and financial ruin began to loom over the family. In times of severe crisis, when practical solutions seemed to fail, the family turned to the traditional beliefs of their homeland. In many traditional cultures, when a streak of bad luck persists, it is believed to be the result of a spiritual curse or a misalignment of cosmic fortune. Some families seek out spiritual advisors to perform rituals meant to cleanse a home and restore prosperity. Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, began searching through local Vietnamese language newspapers for a spiritual solution. Deep in the classified sections, they found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, some 250 miles away. The woman, named Daphne Wright, claimed she possessed the power to lift terrible curses and bring abundant good fortune to those in need. A shadow in Houston. Encouraged by his mother-in-law, Chow Tran reached out to Daphne Wright. He traveled to her home in Houston for a consultation, hoping that her rituals could reverse the downward spiral of their sewing business. Daphne performed her ceremonies, and for a short time, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They believed that their luck was finally about to change. But a year later, the sewing business remained in ruins, and the financial pressure had only intensified. Instead of bringing prosperity, the family's involvement with the spiritual advisor had pulled them into an even deeper, darker hole. Following the discovery of the bodies on June 10, 2012, the detectives focused their attention on gathering immediate forensic evidence. The autopsy conducted at the Tarrant County Medical Examiner's office revealed the true horror of the couple's final moments. While there was clear evidence of blunt force trauma to their heads, the physical blows were not the cause of death. Hong Lee's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of heavy duct tape. Her husband, Long, had been bound with 10 feet of tape around his head and mouth. They had died of suffocation. The sheer cruelty of the act suggested a deep personal animosity, or a desperate desire to ensure they could never speak again. As detectives processed the scene, they received a routine notification that changed the direction of the inquiry. An insurance company representative called to report that the deceased couple carried substantial life insurance policies totaling approximately $1 million. When Detective Stuart inquired about the beneficiaries, the name that came up was Chow Tran. Alibis and dead ends. On June 13, 2012, detectives brought Chow Tran into the Arlington Police Station for a formal interview. He explained that the life insurance policies had been established to ensure the sewing business could continue to operate and support the family if either of the elders passed away. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of the murders, Chow provided a detailed timeline. He explained that the entire family had gathered to celebrate his father-in-law's birthday. The party had lasted until approximately 10 o'clock in the evening, after which the elderly couple had been driven home by another relative. Chow and his immediate family had returned to their own home, providing each other with consistent, interlocking alibis. Timeline of alibis. Afternoon, family gathers for a birthday celebration. 10 p.m., Long and Hong are driven home by a relative. 10:30 p.m., remaining family members arrive at their homes. Night. Interlocking family statements confirm locations. Plus. The police collected DNA samples and fingerprints from Chow and every other family member who had attended the gathering. They compared these samples to the physical evidence collected from the apartment, particularly the discarded marijuana cigarette. When the laboratory results returned, there was no match. The DNA found on the cigarette did not belong to Chow Tran, nor did it match any profile in the national database. The case seemed to hit a brick wall. Over the next 2 years, investigators interviewed more than 50 people, including neighbors, business associates, and local community members. But every lead led to a dead end. The files were placed in storage, and the case grew cold. The horse and the breakthrough. 3 years passed in silence. Then, in October of 2015, a sudden spark of light illuminated the forgotten case. A young man named Willie Guillory was arrested in Houston for felony theft of a horse. Because a felony conviction requires the collection of a DNA sample for the national database, Willie's profile was entered into the system. Within days, the computer flagged a match. The DNA on the discarded marijuana cigarette found at the scene of the Arlington murders in 2012 belonged to Willie Guillory. At the time of the murders, Willie had been only 16 years old. Because he was a minor with no prior felony record, his genetic profile had never been entered into the system. His arrest for a horse theft as an adult was the single missing link the police needed. Detectives brought Willie Guillory to the Arlington police station. At first, he denied ever being in Arlington, but when Detective Stuart explained the infallible science of DNA and how his genetic signature had been recovered from the very room where the elderly couple died, the young man broke down in tears. He confessed to his involvement, but he insisted he was not the mastermind. Willie explained that in June of 2012, his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory, had told him they were going to make a trip to Arlington to handle a job. Willie, feeling he had little choice but to follow his elder's instructions, went along. According to Willie, his uncle had been given a key to the apartment. They entered the home while the couple was away, throwing items around and staging the scene to look like a random gang robbery. They left the blue bandana, the crush pills, and the beer bottle to mislead investigators. Willie had smoked a portion of a marijuana cigarette, leaving behind the small piece of evidence that would eventually seal their fate. When the elderly couple returned home, the staged burglary turned into a scene of physical violence. Willie claimed he ran to block the door to prevent Hong Lu from escaping, while his uncle Bobby subdued Long Nguyen with a blunt object. Once the couple was incapacitated, Bobby used the duct tape to bind them and move them into the small bedroom closet, where they were left to perish. The spiritual loan shark. When asked why they had targeted a quiet, elderly couple they had never met, Willie revealed a crucial name, Daphne Wright. He explained that his Uncle Bobby was a friend of Daphne's, and that Daphne had orchestrated the entire plot because the family owed her a massive amount of money. Detectives moved quickly to arrest Bobby Guillory at his home in Katy, Texas. Facing the prospect of capital murder charges, Bobby also confessed. He painted a vivid picture of Daphne Wright, describing her as a spiritual loan shark who preyed on the desperation of her clients. Bobby explained that the sewing business had never recovered, but Chow Tran had continued to pay Daphne vast sums of money for rituals and spiritual interventions. Over time, Chow and Hong Lu had run up a debt with Daphne that ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000. Daphne was not a person to forgive a debt. When she realized the family had no way of paying her back in cash, she learned about the substantial life insurance policies. She proposed a dark solution. If the elderly couple were to pass away, the insurance payout would cover the debt in full. According to Bobby, Daphne had provided him with the key to the apartment and promised him $10,000 to carry out the deed. When investigators asked Bobby how Daphne had obtained the key to the residence, Bobby looked directly at the detectives and delivered a shocking revelation. He claimed she had received the key directly from Chow Tran. The Ledger of Curses. On August 31st, 2016, detectives executed a search warrant at Daphne Wright's home in Houston. To the outside world, Daphne was a mother of 3 daughters, married to a quiet husband, and running a popular spiritual consulting business. But inside her home, detectives discovered a ledger that detailed the true nature of her operations. The ledger contained meticulous records of clients who were charged $10, $20, $30, and even $40,000 for various spiritual services, including the removal and application of curses. It was a highly lucrative business built entirely on psychological manipulation and fear. With Daphne and the Guillory men in custody, prosecutors focused on building a solid case. To secure a conviction against the mastermind who had stayed far away from the crime scene, they needed the testimony of someone who had direct knowledge of the agreement. They turned to Chow Tran. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony, prosecutors offered Chow immunity from prosecution. It was a difficult decision, a deal with the devil, but it was deemed necessary to ensure that Daphne Wright would never walk free again. Chow Tran took the stand during Daphne's trial in August of 2019. He portrayed Daphne as a terrifying, manipulative figure who held absolute sway over his family's decisions. He claimed that his mother-in-law, Hong, had been so fearful of Daphne's supposed spiritual wrath that she had volunteered a sacrifice herself so the family could collect the insurance money to pay the debt. The defense argued passionately that Chow was a liar who had orchestrated the scheme himself to pocket the $850,000 left over from the insurance payout. They pointed out the complete lack of any written documentation regarding the massive debt Chow claimed to owe. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory also received lengthy prison sentences for their roles in conspiracy. For the investigators who had spent years searching for the truth, the conviction brought a measure of peace, though a sense of unease remained. While the hands that carried out the violence and the voice that ordered it were behind bars, the betrayal at the heart of the family would always linger as a reminder of how easily the search for hope can be twisted into a nightmare. The morning sun of June 10, 2012, did not bring warmth to Arlington, Texas. Instead, it cast a cold, revealing light over a quiet apartment complex where the silence was suddenly shattered by fear. Chow Tran, a 38-year-old Vietnamese immigrant, stood outside the home of his elderly in-laws, his hands trembling as he held his mobile phone. The air was thick with humidity, but a cold shiver ran down his spine. At 7:29 in the morning, he finally made the call to emergency dispatchers, his voice cracking under the weight of an escalating dread. He requested a welfare check on his father-in-law, Long Nguyen, who was 70-something years old, and his mother-in-law, Hong Lee. The dispatcher on the other end of the line tried to gather details, but Chow's panic was difficult to contain. He explained that his teenage son and his wife had gone to look through the window. They had seen everything fallen down inside the apartment. Things were in total disarray. The boy had knocked on the door repeatedly, but there was no answer, only an ominous, heavy silence. The family began to gather on the pavement outside, their anxiety growing with every passing minute. They had noticed that a window to the residence was slightly open, a detail that felt deeply wrong. Too terrified to step inside and face whatever lay beyond that open window. They waited in the driveway, huddled together, praying for the arrival of the police. Officer Weller was the first to receive the dispatch. When he pulled up to the scene, he immediately realized this was not a typical welfare check. Usually, such calls came later in the day, and it was highly unusual to see an entire family standing outside an apartment so early in the morning, their faces pale with terror. Weller approached the front door, calling out as he stepped inside. There was no answer. The interior of the apartment was in complete disarray. bearing all the telltale signs of burglary. The living room was ransacked, with compact discs thrown about and furniture overturned. Weller walked cautiously through the space, checking the kitchen and the bathroom. He found no one. The only room left to check was the master bedroom. Weller stepped into the bedroom. At first, he did not notice anything that stood out. His sole focus was on finding the elderly couple, hoping they had simply gone out for an early morning walk and left the door unlocked. He turned to leave the room, his flashlight beam sweeping across the walls. That was when he paused. On the wall next to a very small closet, he saw dark hand smudges. A sudden hesitation gripped him. Every instinct inside him screamed not to open that closet door. But duty compelled him forward. He reached out, took hold of the handle, and pulled the door open. Inside the cramped space lay two people. It was the mother and the father he had been looking for. They were hog-tied with duct tape. Their heads and mouths were heavily wrapped in the silver adhesive. There was blood everywhere. In that split second, Weller knew they were dead. Even with 14 years of experience on the force, it was the most gruesome, brutal scene he had ever witnessed. In a state of shock, Weller walked out of the bedroom and stood in the middle of the living room, unable to speak, unable to even use his radio for a moment. When he finally regained his composure, he requested a supervisor and a crime scene unit. Chapter 2, The Illusion of Order. When the veteran homicide investigators arrived, they were equally stunned by the sheer violence of the scene. The elderly couple had been beaten with some kind of blunt force object. Dark bloodstains on the carpet, the couch, the table, and the walls indicated that the struggle had begun the moment they walked through their front door. It appeared they had been grabbed and dragged toward the back room, their hands desperately grasping at the walls as they were forced into the bedroom. Initially, detectives theorized that it was a robbery gone wrong. However, the extreme violence seemed entirely disproportionate for a simple theft. Detective Stuart, a seasoned investigator with 21 years in homicide, noted that the victims suffered severe blunt force trauma to their foreheads, with markings that suggested the use of a tool like a hammer. But the most disturbing element was the duct tape. Hong Lee's face had been wrapped in 25 feet of duct tape, while Long Wen's face was bound with 10 feet of tape. They had not died from the beatings. They had suffocated. The neighborhood was left in mourning. Long and Hong were known as a sweet, generous, and hard-working couple who never bothered anyone. They had immigrated to the United States from Vietnam in the year 2000, bringing their 3 children and their cherished cultural traditions to Arlington to pursue the American dream. They established a commercial sewing business, enlisting their son-in-law, Chow Tran, to handle the English-speaking contractors. For a time, they thrived, even securing a lucrative contract to manufacture garments for Disney. But by 2011, their good fortune had vanished. The Disney contract was lost, and the business began a rapid downward spiral. Desperate to save their livelihood, the family sought a traditional spiritual solution. In many Vietnamese communities, it is customary to consult a spiritual advisor when facing severe crises, like financial ruin. Chow and his mother-in-law found an advertisement in a local Vietnamese newspaper for a spiritual advisor based in Houston, some 250 miles away. Her name was Daphne Wright. Daphne advertised that she could lift bad curses and perform rituals to bring good fortune. Believing she could turn their business around, Chow traveled to Houston for a consultation. He returned full of hope, but instead of bringing luck, the connection initiated a chain of events that would end in a double murder. At the crime scene, detectives discovered several odd clues. On the coffee table lay a plate of crushed prescription pills and a marijuana cigarette. More suspiciously, a light blue bandana was wrapped around a beer bottle. Arlington had active Vietnamese gangs, and the light blue color was associated with one of them. It seemed like a gang calling card, a sign that they were taking responsibility for crime. Yet, experienced detectives began to feel skeptical. The crime scene felt too perfect, almost staged. Most local gang members did not commit such highly stylized, ritualistic murders of elderly people without a clear extortion motive. Soon, a routine call from an insurance company changed the direction of the entire investigation. The company reported that the deceased couple held a life insurance policy worth at least $1 million. The primary beneficiary was none other than Chow Tran. Chapter 3. The Long Cold Road. On June 13, 2012, detectives interviewed Chow Tran at the police station. Chow explained that the insurance policy was intended to ensure the business could survive if one of the family members passed away. When questioned about his whereabouts on the night of the murders, Chow provided an airtight alibi. He explained that the family had gathered for a birthday party to celebrate his father-in-law. Afterward, they had returned to his house, eaten, and played cards until past 10 o'clock. The police collected DNA and fingerprint samples from Chow and other family members, comparing them to the evidence collected from the apartment. They had managed to retrieve a clean DNA profile from the marijuana cigarette found on the coffee table. Detectives were hopeful that this would be the key to identifying the killer, but the results brought a major disappointment. The DNA did not match Chow, any family members, or any profiles stored in the national database known as CODIS. For over 2 years, the investigation stalled. With no matches and no new leads, the case turned completely cold. It seemed the killers had committed the perfect crime, leaving behind stage gang clues and a DNA profile belonging to someone with no prior criminal record. The breakthrough came in October of 2015. The police received a notification that the DNA from the marijuana cigarette finally matched a profile newly entered into the database. The match belonged to Willie Guillory, a young man who had recently been convicted of felony for stealing a horse in Houston. At the time of the murders in 2012, Willie had been only 16 years old. Because he was a minor with no prior felony convictions, his DNA had never been entered into the system until his arrest as an adult. On October 17, 2015, detectives brought Willie Guillory in for questioning. When confronted with the scientific evidence placing him inside the apartment, the young man broke down in tears and confessed. He revealed that he had not acted alone. He had been accompanied by his 49-year-old uncle, Bobby Guillory. According to Willie, his uncle had driven him from Houston to Arlington on June 9, 2012. Bobby had a key to the apartment, which allowed them to enter without forcing the door. Bobby instructed Willie to throw items around and leave the beer bottle, the blue bandana, and the crushed pills to make it look like a gang-related robbery. Willie had smoked a portion of the marijuana cigarette and left it behind, unaware that it would eventually lead to their capture. When the elderly couple returned home, the burglary turned into a violent ambush. Willie ran to stop Hong Lee from escaping or screaming, while Bobby grabbed Long Nguyen and beat him with a blunt object. Once the victims were incapacitated, the two men used duct tape to bind them and carried them into the bedroom closet, leaving them to suffocate. When asked why they had targeted the couple, Willie pointed directly to a woman named Daphne Wright, a friend of his uncle. He claimed Daphne was the mastermind who provided the key and ordered the hit because the family owed her a massive amount of money. Chapter 4. The Price of the Curse. Following Willie's confession, detectives tracked down Bobby Guillory in Katy, Texas, on December 16, 2015. Confronted with a search warrant for his DNA, Bobby confessed to his role in the murders. He claimed he was desperate for money after being laid off and had agreed to help Daphne in exchange for $10,000. Bobby described Daphne Wright as a spiritual loan shark. Over the years, Chow and his mother-in-law had run up a massive debt with her, which had ballooned to between $250,000 and $280,000 as they repeatedly paid for rituals to lift the supposed curse on their business. When they could no longer pay, Daphne discovered they held substantial life insurance policies. She allegedly decided that the only way to recover her money was to have the couple killed So Chow. could collect the insurance payout. Most shocking of all, Bobby claimed that Daphne had obtained the key to the apartment directly from Chow Tran. On August 31st, 2016, detectives arrested Daphne right at her home in Houston. Inside, they discovered detailed ledgers showing that she charged clients tens of thousands of dollars for spiritual services, including placing and removing curses. Although Daphne refused to speak without a lawyer, prosecutors knew they needed a strong witness to secure a conviction against her. They approached Chow Tran with an offer of immunity in exchange for his full testimony. With his lawyer present, Chow painted a chilling picture of Daphne's control over his family. He claimed that he and his mother-in-law were terrified of Daphne's spiritual powers, believing she could place a devastating curse on them if they failed to pay. Chow even claimed that Hong Li had offered to sacrifice herself so the family could collect the insurance money to clear their debt. Detectives found the story of the mother-in-law's voluntary sacrifice absurd, but they recognized that Chow's testimony was essential to convicting the coordinator of the plot. In August of 2019, Daphne Wright stood trial for capital murder. Chow took the stand, portraying her as a ruthless, greedy woman who orchestrated the killings. The defense argued that Chow was the true instigator, pointing out that the $850,000 of insurance money had gone directly into Chow's pocket, and that there was no written documentation of the alleged $280,000 debt. Ultimately, the jury found Daphne Wright guilty of capital murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Bobby and Willie Guillory were also held accountable for their roles in the conspiracy. Because of the immunity agreement, Chow Tran walked free, a resolution that left the lead investigators with a lingering sense of injustice. Yet, they remained hopeful that the truth would eventually bring complete accountability, believing that what is done in the dark must eventually come to light. The summer sun in Texas has a way of baking the earth until the pavement shimmers like water in the distance. In the city of Arlington, a place where communities of different cultures weave together into a rich and colorful tapestry, the morning of June 10, 2012, began with deceptive stillness. The birds were singing in the leafy branches of the oak trees, and the hum of early morning traffic was just beginning to rise. But within the quiet walls of a modest apartment complex, a tragedy had unfolded that would shake the local community to its core and challenge the resolve of even the most experienced investigators. Part 1. The Threads of the American Dream. To understand the weight of what occurred, one must first look back to the year 2000, when an elderly couple named Long Nguyen and Hong Lu made the brave decision to leave their homeland of Vietnam. Like many before them, they were drawn by the promise of the American dream. They wanted to build a safe, prosperous legacy for their 3 beloved children and their growing circle of grandchildren. They settled in Arlington, Texas, a bustling city within Tarrant County known for its vibrant and supportive Vietnamese community, which had flourished in waves ever since 1975. Long and Hong were a gentle, warm-hearted couple. Their neighbors knew them as sweet, generous souls who never bothered anyone. They brought with them their time-honored traditions, their deep spiritual beliefs, and an unshakable work ethic. Soon after arriving, they established a commercial sewing business. Because their English was limited, they relied heavily on their 38-year-old son-in-law, Chow Tran, to help run the operations. Chow, who spoke English fluently, became the public face of the business, coordinating with contractors and navigating the complex commercial landscape. For nearly a decade, their hard work bore fruit. They secured lucrative contracts, including prestigious agreements with major entertainment giants like Disney. The family felt a profound sense of pride and gratitude. They had built a life of dignity from the ground up, proving that dedication and family unity could overcome any barrier. However, by the year 2011, the tides of fortune began to turn. The global economy shifted, the vital contract with Disney was lost, and the commercial sewing business began a steep and stressful decline. Desperate to protect their livelihood and rescue their family from financial ruin, Long and Hong looked to the cultural traditions of their homeland. In many traditional East Asian cultures, spiritual harmony is believed to be directly tied to worldly success. When faced with major life crises, such as bankruptcy, legal troubles, or deep personal distress, families often seek the guidance of a spiritual advisor to perform rituals of protection and healing, inviting luck and warding off negative energies. Searching through a local Vietnamese newspaper, Chow Tran and his mother-in-law, Hong Le, found an advertisement for a spiritual advisor located 250 miles away in Houston. The woman advertised herself as a powerful mystic who could lift curses, bring good fortune, and restore balance to those in need. Her name was Daphne Wright. Encouraged by Hong's deep faith, Chow contacted Daphne and drove to her Houston home for a consultation. Daphne performed a traditional ritual, and for a brief moment, the family felt a renewed sense of hope. They believed they were finally on the path to recovery. But instead of restoring their fortune, this connection would slowly draw them into a web of manipulation, greed, and ultimate darkness. Part 2. The Discovery on a Summer Morning. On the morning of June 10, 2012, at 7:29 in the morning, an emergency dispatcher in Arlington received a frantic phone call from Chow Tran. He requested a welfare check on his elderly in-laws, explaining that his family had gathered outside the apartment and noticed that a window was open. Things did not look right. Chow's teenage son had knocked on the door, but there was no response. Terrified of what they might find, the family waited outside for the authorities to arrive. Officer Weller, a seasoned police officer, was dispatched to the scene. Even from a distance, he could tell this was not a typical welfare check. An entire family was standing outside the apartment complex in the quiet. Early hours of the morning, their faces clouded with intense worry. Upon entering the residence, Officer Weller immediately noticed signs of an apparent burglary. The living room was in complete disarray, with compact discs scattered across the floor and furniture overturned. He called out, but his voice echoed back through the quiet rooms. The kitchen and bathroom were empty. Finally, he approached the bedroom. At first glance, the bedroom appeared empty. Officer Weller turned to leave, but as his flashlight swept across the wall, he noticed faint hand smudges next to a very small closet door. A sense of deep hesitation washed over him. Every instinct told him that opening that door would change everything, yet his duty compelled him forward.